Horror is one of the biggest subgenres in film, literature, TV, gaming, you name it. It is an undeniable element of the human experience, and is something we try to avoid as best we can. Although it seems that obvious given the amount of horror literature and films and games and stuff, people have a morbid fascination with it. As with most artistic creations, there are numerous subgenres to horror, and as such, fans will happily argue for hours over what's what and where on the lists. And for that reason, this video exists.
Let's get to the point. Lovecraftian horror is the best kind of horror, the scariest kind of horror there is. Basically what I'm saying is that if you think of a chart that rated horror intensity, you'd have, I don't know, at number 1, Ernest Scared Stupid, and Lovecraft at number 10, and everything else would fall in between.
Now obviously this video is very subjective, it's just my opinion on the subject, but hopefully by the end of this video I'll have been articulative enough to get some points across and maybe sway some opinions. Anyway, we'll see.
The reason why I rate Lovecraftian horror as the best is based on the inherent philosophy of cosmicism. Lovecraft's stories are intertwined and inseparable with the philosophy and the worldview he had. In his life he was an atheist, a materialist, never believing in the slightest supernatural thing, and also always having a general ennui or disdain towards humanity. In his mythos, humans are nothing more than a simple life form really, developed by beings way superior to us for no real reason either. If you're wondering where in the mythos it actually says that humans were made by alien creatures, then you're gonna have to look through at the Mountains of Madness again. We're not the smartest, the strongest species, our technology and scientific understandings are crude, we have only been around for a brief moment in the universe's lifespan, there's no good or evil dichotomy either, so there's no God looking out for us, no heaven to go to when we die. We're basically alone. So when you think of the mythos, you're basically looking at an atheistic, naturalistic, materialist, sort of nihilistic universe. You need to at least be able to put yourself in the shoes of someone who has that sort of mentality to really appreciate what Lovecraft was going for.
I feel like this video will be a lot more successful in getting my point across if I give some actual examples from the horror that we see most commonly these days. So let's take a look at that.
I'm not at all religious, but I admit it, these films can be quite unnerving. In the world of demonic or religious horror, there's always two realms of existence. You've got heaven and you've got hell. And basically Earth is stuck in the middle and both sides are fighting for our souls. The hell depicted in many incarnations is, well, a hellish nightmare basically. Eternal suffering and torture, dwelling with some of the worst creatures man ever created in his mind. When I played Doom 3, the video game, the hell level was truly unnerving for me and I couldn't wait to get past it. So the idea of going to a hellish place is quite scary. Being there with all these demonic things totally invested with torturing you, that's a terrible thing and a terrible fate to suffer. But then there's God and heaven. If you die as a believer, you go to heaven, and godliness often comes to aid humanity in battling the demons. You have priests, holy water, exorcisms, praying, whatever. All these things can be used to combat whatever antagonist you have in these stories. But how many of these religious films end with some priest shouting at the demon to get the fuck out of the possessed body?
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
And that seems to do the trick always. It's a bit unsatisfying personally. I'm looking at these two films in particular. In some stories the protagonist is even something the demons fear, like in Constantine or The Doom Guy. Sure, the stories can be grim, but the whole thing of there being an absolute right and wrong is ridiculous to me. I also struggle to suspend my disbelief when it comes to the stories where Christianity comes to save the day.
We're gonna pray in tongues. Hallelujah, let's do it. Oh, we love you, Jesus. So
In Lovecraft's atheistic world, sorry, you're alone. No God, no praying will save you. If you die, you die. Bye bye. No supernatural powers will aid you. There's no better realm of existence waiting for you. However, some of the characters that you see in Dagon or the Temple, they still kill themselves even though that they know nothing better is waiting for them. Total non-existence becomes better than the fate that they get stuck with in these stories. And that just really highlights just how desperate they must be to actually kill themselves. This is exactly why I think Lovecraftian horror is way better than anything that you'll see in religious or demonic horror. These will be stories like Cujo or Jaws, where there is a relatively normal animal, perhaps bigger than normal or more aggressive than normal. Usually the humans have to be disadvantaged somehow for there to be any tension, like trapped in the animal's habitat or not having weapons to fight back with. However, in Lovecraft's world, even with all our technology and resources, there's no real combating the things that we share the planet with. Admittedly, he never really tackled the idea of some monstrous, albeit normal animal, so we have to skip this point. People seem to really enjoy these types of films. I was looking for shark films just as an example, and I found so damn many, it's a little over the top. There's also films for just about every animal you can imagine. Bears, lizards, mosquitoes, dogs, birds, sharks, apes, bats, rats, crocodiles, and fish. The birds is the worst offender of the lot though. I have no idea why people continue to jerk this film off so goddamn much. It's clearly listed as a horror film all the time, but at no point in watching this stupid film did I ever feel any sense of dread. Sharks I get, crocodiles and bears sure, but birds? Really, just look at the scene and tell me it's not ridiculous. These types of films are all well and good, but I do find them to be a little mundane. Most of these films can be summed up as man's struggle with the food chain, which is basically quite a mundane issue and is utterly devoid of any of that cosmic dread that you find in Lovecraft. Give a person the right gun with the right caliber and I think most of these stories could be over in a few minutes.
Smile, you son of a bitch!
This stuff doesn't scare me at all. Obviously I would be scared if someone tried to slice me up in real life, but I'd also fight back. I'd get angry, and frankly, as a strong guy who's been to the gym for a few years, I think I'd stand a decent chance if I had a good weapon. At least against someone like Michael Myers, maybe not Jason Voorhees. In other words, these types of stories are, like with animal horror stories, utterly mundane to me. Humans have been killing each other since before we were even Homo sapiens. Humans can be terrifying, yes. Imagine being tied up in a serial killer's basement.
Put the fucking lotion in the basket!
Yes, it's a shit situation to be in, but frankly, it's just a risk of being a human being on Earth, that's it. There have been plenty of serial killers throughout humanity's history, so it's not like something otherworldly and alien to the human experience, if you get what I mean. You know, if one gets you, c'est la vie, right?
Do you see? Do you see? Yes, I see!
But look at these stories. The bad guy is usually just one character walking slowly towards the next victim, not even really trying. It's supposed to be ominous and foreboding, but I never really felt that. The victims are usually hysterical idiots or ordinary people who lose common sense in the face of danger, or horny teenagers trying to get laid in a cabin or something. Antagonistic humans in Lovecraft's world do exist, although usually they're relegated to just being cultists who worship the actual thing to be afraid of. Which is more interesting, I think, because it shows how the human mind snaps when exposed to these horrors of that mythos. And talking about human protagonists, a lot of the times in these horror films and horror stories, we shout at the TV or the book as the characters do stupid things and get into even worse situations than they originally were in. They only have their own ignorance or stupidity to blame for their situation. Look at the protagonists in Lovecraftian stories though. For the most part, they are well-educated men of science and intelligence. They're well equipped to handle these horrors, and yet how many endings result in madness and death? There's no way out for them. Isn't it a lot more impactful when you do your best but nonetheless are screwed anyway? Creature horror would be a lot like animal horror but with fantasy creations instead of earthly creations. Now this sort of thing is a lot more frightening because we aren't limited by what's real when we create a horrible creature character for a novel or a film. Humans inevitably stumble across something inhuman and have to fight off against it. And our petty issues become a side issue and we have to unite and test ourselves to see if we're worthy of overcoming this horrific obstacle. Films like Alien, Predator, The Thing, Phantoms, Godzilla, and Deep Rising are some of my favorite films ever just because of this concept. Lovecraft made a wider range of creatures, so I cannot criticize this subgenre without being too much of a hypocrite. However, there is usually one point that makes Lovecraft once more scarier than the average creature film or book. With creature horror, it is clear that these creatures are the abnormalities in our world. We humans are the normal, the rulers of Earth. These things appear in the story and the goal becomes to restore the norm in favor of humanity. Kill the predator, bomb Godzilla, blow the alien into space, and humanity can go back to normal. But in Lovecraft's world, we are just another low-ranking organism, ants to these horrific beings like Cthulhu or the Deep Ones or Dagon. The Deep Ones or Elder Things are no more an abnormality to the status quo than humans are. We're all just part of the same system. But their chances of survival are much higher than ours, and that makes it all that much more scary. I think most of us have fantasized about the zombie apocalypse and what we do if it ever really happened. A lot of the times depictions of zombie horror are actually kind of fun. Look at Dead Rising or the film Zombieland. Humanity is freed from the tedium of existence and given a chance to prove themselves worthy of living, or to reject a society that maybe they find themselves disliking. Hate your job and boss? Hey, he's a zombie now, and the office building is on fire, so now you can kill him with a cricket bat, go to the pub, and wait for things to all blow over. Most of the time as well in zombie horror, there's always some sort of safe haven for humanity to go to in order to rebuild itself. World War Z, the film, had these cities with the giant walls around them. In the book, if I remember things correctly, humanity did manage to adjust and re-establish itself well enough. In the film version of I Am Legend, they had that camp in Vermont where they eventually developed the cure. In Dawn of the Dead, there was that island they sailed off to in the end. So, it's not really that bleak if you think about it. Lovecraft of course dabbled with zombies in Reanimator, but I'm hesitant to really even bring up that work since he wrote the story more as a request, a chore to earn some money. He even called the writing of the story manifestly inartistic. As a result, it's one of his least scary stories. Also, zombie films, if you really think about it, tend to tackle human issues really. Didn't George Romero say Dawn of the Dead was about blind consumerism or something, and that's why it was set in the mall?
What are they doing? Why do they come here?
Some kind of instinct, memory, what they used to do.
Now, vampire fiction and vampire films are so diverse that it's hard to say if the vampire in question is actually scary or not. It really depends on the interpretation of vampires at the time. Vampires these days, though, seem to be more admired than anything. The image of a sexy vampire is so common now, and understandably so. The psychology of the thing is of this lithe, seductive, mysterious, powerful being which will dominate you, and even the act of biting the neck is quite sexual. Or is that just me? If you do get turned into a vampire in the story, it's not always such a bad thing depending on how you look at it. Sure, you do sacrifice some aspects of life, like your family maybe, or never being able to get a tan again, but think of all the powers you get and the freedom. That's gotta be a plus as well, right? Even if you decide you positively, absolutely don't want to be turned into a vampire, vampires in all their incarnations have big weaknesses you can exploit to defend yourself. Sunlight, silver, and wooden stakes are the most common ones. If you include religious elements into the vampire horror story as well, vampires become even less scary if you ask me. Add crosses and holy water to your arsenal that you have already, plus the fact that God exists and is already on your side, just like I pointed out with the demonic/religious horror films and horror stories, it's not really that bad anymore, right? One exception might be the recent series called The Strain, which is a series of books first and then it was later made into a TV series, which I highly recommend. The vampires there are these horrible, disgusting things, purely biological creatures, so no God on your side, plus the consequences of getting bitten are basically being drawn into this collective. You lose your mind, it's like the Borg from Star Trek. So vampires can be complete fucking pussies, case example, or they can be really terrifying. So it really depends on how the author or the filmmaker chooses to interpret it. But nonetheless, I still say vampire fiction is really nothing as scary as you'll find in Lovecraft. And besides, would having Salma Hayek as your dominatrix really be such a bad thing? Come on guys, be honest.
You'll be my slave.
Survival horror is pretty damn scary, I must admit. I grew up with the original Resident Evil, Dino Crisis, and Silent Hill games. And I think video games are the best way to implement the true horror that is survival horror, because you actually have an active say in what your character does. You are responsible for their survival or death. Whereas with a story or a film, you are really just watching. Most often you're a survivor after some horrific event has taken place and you've got to escape the general area where it happened. The horror in such a case is usually one location only, and if or when you do manage to escape, the horror is over. Just like in Resident Evil, the idea was always to get out of Raccoon City, or in Silent Hill, it was to escape Silent Hill. Of course it's not easy, and the fact that in most cases 99% of the other humans are dead or turned into some horrific enemy, your chances aren't very high at all. I mentioned earlier that with creature horror, the creatures are usually the abnormality in our world, but in the case of survival horror, typically you are the abnormality. Places like Silent Hill and Raccoon City no longer are domains for humanity, and everything is hostile towards you. I find that extremely terrifying. But the thing about survival horror, as scary as it is not as scary as anything you'll find in a Lovecraftian story, I think. Why? Because in survival horror, there's always hope. Always a chance at survival, hence the name. In Lovecraft's world, you can survive, live your life just fine, but if in your lifetime the deep ones rise up, if the stars are right and Cthulhu awakes, sorry, no place you can go, no amount of shotgun ammo is going to help you. In some Lovecraft tales like The Shadow Out of Time, as well as He, it is made quite clear that humanity in total will eventually be completely wiped out, no survivors. In some cases of Lovecraft horror, your fate is sealed even from birth. Look at The Rats in the Walls, The Shadow over Innsmouth, The Festival, The Outsider, The Facts Concerning the Late Arthur Jermyn. In all these stories, the protagonists have literally no escape from their fate, because in all cases, they are genetically descended from the thing that is so horrible that they're trying to escape from. The monstrosity is in their DNA. Upon discovering that they are descended from deep ones, or the crawling worm things, or the hideous ape creatures from unknown Africa, the protagonists either kill themselves or go insane. How do you escape from something that's in your blood? You gotta admit, that's pretty fucked up.
In conclusion, I'll just say this. Imagine you're a character in a horror story, right? And now think of all the examples we've looked at here in this video. Of which of those examples or subgenres would you least like to be a character in? So, for example, would you take your chances in a werewolf horror? Or would you think you'd be better off surviving in a slasher film? Or, if you're crazy, would you go for a Lovecraftian story where you're one of the protagonists? I think the chances of survival are best if you do not go for a Lovecraftian horror. And that is exactly my point in this whole video.
Personally, I would gladly take my chances in Raccoon City or the Titty Twister rather than in Innsmouth or the tombs of the Nameless City.